Interviewing Dr. Edward F. Parker, Professor Emeritus, Surgery at the Medical University of South Carolina, who served as president of the State Medical Association during the years 1972 and 73. This interview is conducted by Dr. Laurie Brown and Ms. Monya Green. We're in the cardiothoracic conference room at the Medical University here in Charleston. Now, just by way of introduction, I got to say that Dr. Parker has had a long and distinguished career in medicine and surgery here at the Medical University. He was one of the early pioneers in the surgery of the heart, particularly in this section of the country, and his work with carcinoma of the esophagus is known throughout the world. Now, Dr. Parker has been a great teacher over the years, and just to put his teaching career in perspective, I've been with the Medical University for 36 years and was made Professor Emeritus of Anesthesiology in July of this year. And Dr. Parker was one of my professors of surgery who taught me in medical school. He's taught virtually every medical student who's been through this Medical University, Medical College of South Carolina for a long number of years. And it's our pleasure today to interview Dr. Parker. Dr. Parker, the first questions I want to ask you is to get you to tell me a little bit about your family. Your father and mother, sort of where they came from, what your family did. I think there's a long line of physicians in the Parker family. So if you would just tell me first about a little bit about them.
Well, my family came to this country mainly from England and from France. And my grandfather, my father's side, my grandfather was a doctor, and so was my father. My grandfather was professor of anatomy and dean, which is now called Preston, for many years. My father was professor of ophthalmology and otolaryngology for many years, and when my grandfather died, he succeeded to the deanship, but he resigned in 2 years because it was not practical, I understand, for him to continue his practice and also continue as dean. One of my uncles was professor of chemistry for many years and also a vice dean, and a half-brother who was professor of surgery for many years. That about covers my family. Most of them have lived here in Charleston, but many have been away also and come back. I don't think I have any more to say about the family.
Well, you were born here in Charleston?
I was born here in Charleston, right. And as years passed and I lived away for about 12 years, I decided there might be other places just as nice, but not necessarily any nicer, and therefore I decided to come back. I wanted three things when I finished residency training. I wanted a place with decent climate and not snow all year round, and with seasons, and with salt water, and with a medical school. And the only place that met those criteria was Charleston.
All right. Well, now, where did you get your undergraduate training? And then where did you do your residency training?
I went to the University of South Carolina for 2 years, having entered as a sophomore. At that time, one could go to medical school at the end of the third year and get a degree after the completion of medical school. So I obtained my degree from the University of South Carolina in 1933, and a degree in Duke South Carolina in 1931 and a degree in Duke in 1933 because at that time Duke was on the quarter system, which I think is clearly the best way to run a medical school for maximum utilization of the students' time and money. And I'm sorry that we don't have it here any longer. So I had my medical degree in 1933. Then I had a year of internship in medicine at the University of Rochester in New York. At that time, it was the fifth richest university of the world, even though I didn't know it before I went there. And then I had an internship in surgery at Vanderbilt University for 1 year. My plan was to do medicine, surgery, and pathology before I decided what to really do, finally, but there just wasn't enough time for pathology. In any case, we had surgical pathology in the surgical service at Vanderbilt. So then I wanted to stay on at Vanderbilt, but I didn't have the opportunity at that time. And so I went to the University of Virginia as assistant resident in surgery, which was an exceedingly valuable experience, and with practice markedly different from what it was at Vanderbilt in the way of a surgical technique. After 1 year at Virginia, I went back to Vanderbilt for 3 more and completed the residency in 1939, and then I moved to Charleston.
And you've been here ever since?
Excuse me?
You've been here ever since?
Yes, I've been there since, except for being in the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now, how was medicine in Charleston when you first came here? You practiced in Charleston for a while before you went into the Army?
Yes, for 3 years, yes. Yes, medicine in Charleston was very interesting at that time and also in retrospect. Now, nearly every patient had a doctor for anything and everything, so that it was exceedingly difficult for a new man to get started. At that time, I would say that it would take a person 3 to 5 years to really get started if he or she was a so-called specialist and presumably tried to do things better than anybody else could do them. There were only 2 people doing nothing but surgery alone. And one was Dr. Cradle, who was professor of surgery in the school here, and who was not interested in outside practice in any way. And the other was my half-brother, Dr. William H. Brillo, who did both. And I, too, did both, always have. Believe it's best. The difficulty in starting was tremendous. My gross income for the first 18 months I was in practice averaged about $45 a month. And if I didn't have an aunt who was kind enough to give me 3 meals a day and a roof over my head, I'd have gone crazy. After that, things opened up. The occasion was I was asked to see a patient with a fracture of the neck of the femur, and an elderly lady, and I told him what was needed. That is closed reduction and internal fixation. And I was asked if I wanted to do the operation to somebody else, and I said I would do it, thank you. And fortunately, the lady got a perfect result. And then people began to know that I might be living not only in Charleston, rather than just returning for a vacation sometime, and also in the practice of surgery. Hadn't done one for at least a year before, 18 months, as a matter of fact, and haven't done one since.
Now, you were in practice for 3 years before you went into service
Yes,
in World
yes.
War II.
Yes, yeah.
You want to tell me just a little bit about where you went into service, where you went, what you did,
Yeah.
just sort of briefly about that wartime experience, particularly interested since today is November the 11th, 1992, formerly
Well,
Armistice Day and
yeah,
now
yeah.
Veterans Day.
Yeah. Well, in the military service, I was always interested. Many of my family been in military service in colonial times. And when Germany invaded Poland in 1939, I thought I knew that we were going to be in the war sooner or later, and that if so, I wanted to be in it. So at that time, I applied to the Navy medical service. A doctor was not in charge of the recruiting medical personnel, and he did not accord what I thought was the proper recognition of the training that I had had. The Navy at that time had two services, the general and the specialist. The general service, one did whatever one was assigned, be it dermatology or obstetrics or anything, and the special service allowed one to be assigned to the service in which she was supposed to have maximum interest in training. Well, I was denied the special service, so I heard no more from the Navy and sought no more. In time, I was asked to join the Vanderbilt unit, which became the 300th General Hospital, and it was activated in July 1992. And
1942.
I mean 1942, of course, 1942. And we were stationed at Camp Forest, Tennessee. There, we did work at the station hospital. In addition to the regular staff of the station hospital, that became tiresome. Everybody was restless and wanting to go overseas. But in the meantime, I also did all the surgery in a war prisoners hospital, prisoners of war hospital. And in both of the two, I relearned German, thinking from prisoners, kind of thinking that sooner or later I would be in Germany. I had had German in college, but there had been a lapse of time, so it was most interesting. The second most famous commander of submarines of the Germans in World War I was a patient, and he was the most arrogant soul I've ever seen. That made it very difficult to want to try to help him, which is not usual for medical practice. In any case, that he was reluctant to take any advice or to listen, and therefore I was about as distant from him as I could get, even though he was my patient, and I did all that I could. There were a number of other personalities in the war prisoners. The Germans and the Italian prisoners of war had to be separated because the Germans would really physically abuse and sometimes nearly kill the Italians. But that was short-lived, and then we were sent overseas, first to North Africa. Our hospital was under construction for 5 days when Italy surrendered, and then everything that had been done in the first 5 days was torn down, and we waited to go over to Italy. We went over to Italy about 2 months later, went on Armistice Day in 1943. 1943, on a hospital ship which had formerly been in the Savannah line, servicing New York and Savannah with freight and passenger service. Exceedingly rough trip that was very fortuitous for me because we had not had any shell eggs for months and months. And on the ship we had shell eggs, and everybody else was seasick, so I ate more than I could possibly ever hope to again. But in any case, in Italy, we had a beautiful hospital made of marble tile and terrazzo. Of course, they have no wood in Italy and North Africa. They used it long time ago. But in spite of the beautiful appearance of the hospital, there was no elevator. There was no water supply, and no electric lights. Nothing what one would expect. No furniture. We took over one half of a hospital built by Mussolini for tuberculosis in the southern half of Italy. To get the hospital open in 5 days after we landed, we, that is all personnel, including nurses, took up on our backs 7 floors, up to 7 floors, every bed, mattress, springs, bedside tables, working desk, equipment, including all instruments in the operating room, everything one would need in 5 days. After that, we were exceedingly busy. I worked 1 year from 8 in the morning until 2 a.m. and no holiday, no vacation, no nothing. And after that, the war in Italy began to slow down. So, after the war ended, I returned to Charleston to resume what I'd been doing before.
Excuse me now, what type operations did you do when you were in Italy?
Well,
The general surgery or general and thoracic or?
I did in Italy practically no general surgery, except I helped the ENT man do tonsillectomies for a while among service military personnel because he said he had so much he couldn't do them all, and he'd be glad if I'd help him. At that time, as I mentioned, we had no electricity. In order to have illumination, we had to wait until the sun was up about until 10 a.m. so that we could get enough light in the reflecting head mirror to see in the throat to remove the tonsils properly. And I think some of our patients actually had a sunburn of the pharynx. And so I tired of that, and as my own thoracic work increased, I didn't have any more time for that.
I guess there was a lot of thoracic work, wasn't there?
Yeah, oh yeah. Now, in the thoracic work, I had a 100-bed ward, no intern, no students, nobody, except the nursing service. Anywhere from 5 to 15 new admissions a day, all of them with chest wounds of one kind or another. Our hospital was the chest center for the Mediterranean Theater of Operations, and in the conduct of which Dr. Thomas Burford joined me from the 2nd Auxiliary Surgical Group. And a lot of the work was debridement and secondary closure of wounds and skin grafts when they couldn't be closed, but a tremendous amount of hemothorax from the wounds, anywhere from 5 to 15 thoracenteses a day. We only had 2 sets. The Army only provided one. I had to buy one on the Italian open market. My ward man sterilized or re-sterilized one set while I was using the other. During that time, we also developed or redeveloped, because there's not much new in medicine, the principle of decortication of the lung for acute empyema and for clotted hemothorax, and the results of those efforts were most gratifying.
And then you came back to Charleston.
Yes, then I came back to Charleston and started out just where I'd left off.
Were you married at that time, Dr. Parker?
I met my wife when when I was in Camp Forest, Tennessee, and we will have been married 50 years next month.
How much family did y'all have?
Excuse me?
How much family do you have?
Well, we have
Children?
We have five sons. 5 sons. All pants and no frocks, as some of our brethren would classify them.
And your wife was named what?
My wife was named Alice Cheatham Hodgson. Grandfather had been vice chancellor, the equivalent of president of the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, and her father had been treasurer at the university for about 40 years.
Now, when you came back to Charleston, how do you think you first got interested in organized medicine from the?
How did I become interested in organized medicine? Well, I have no specific answer to that.
Was there a county medical society then?
Yes, the Medical Society of South Carolina, which of course antedated the South Carolina Medical Association by many years, was here, and of course the South Carolina Medical Association was in existence too. It was only natural that it was a way to meet one's confreres and to enjoy the friendship, and also to profit from their experience in various endeavors.
Well, do you remember some of your early experiences during that time?
Well, before I went in the Army, there weren't many experiences. I was assisting my brother, Dr. Prillo, in many cases, but I had very few cases independently who were private patients. Now, I had some work on the wards. Dr. Cathcart would assign the non-private patients to various men on the staff, and so I had my share of that type of work. But it was awkward because oftentimes what I needed to discuss was a patient on somebody else's service. These were non-private patients. And it was awkward because in something like carcinoma of the breast, while I would propound the Halsted principle of radical mastectomy, I would come back and find out that the patient had had a simple mastectomy. And then it was perfectly obvious that the students would either think that I was a fool, or the attending doctor was a fool, or both of us were fools. And so there was no unanimity then on how it should be treated. And it's remarkable how it's reverted now, so that simple mastectomy has come back into vogue in selected patients.
Now, before you were elected president of the State Medical Association, what were some of your experiences in organized medicine? Did you?
None.
None?
None.
Okay.
Well,
what were some of the major issues facing medicine at that
excuse
time?
me?
Some of the major issues facing medicine
Well,
at
the
that time.
major issue facing medicine then was the same as it is now: how to take care of the indigent sick. And at that time, the system was that the city of Charleston had city physicians, who were assigned to look after the indigent sick if they could not come, or did not need to come to the hospital, or couldn't come to one of the outpatient clinics. I do not know how much those men were paid, but apparently it was adequate, because the same ones served year after year for many years. There were about 5 or 6, and the system worked very effectively. And it's possible we should go back to it now. The county, really, they're called city physicians, but they were really paid by the county because the city had transferred to the county the financial obligation for paying for the medical care of the sick, because so many of the patients in Roper Hospital resided outside of the city limits in the county, and therefore it was unfair for city residents to carry the whole burden. So in that time, about the time that Bernard Maybank was mayor, that financial obligation was transferred from the city to the county.
Now, during your term as president, what were some of the major issues that were facing medicine in general at that time?
I would say whether or not we should have socialized medicine, and most people were opposed to it. The other was that whether or not the South Carolina Medical Association should continue its operation in the insurance field, at which time it owned and operated the South Carolina Blue Shield. Now that was a very valid way to try to help people who could not pay their bills. In other words, depending upon the salary that they said they made, medical fees were adjusted, lowered appropriately. Unfortunately, many of the patients abused the system and said they didn't make as much as they really made, and therefore it was not as perfect as it could have been. The time came then that other insurance companies such as Aetna, Prudential, and many others came into the physician payment field of medical care, so that the South Carolina Blue Shield, owned by the South Carolina Medical Association, no longer served its original purpose. The others were tax-paying, and we were non-tax-paying, which was really unfair to the state of South Carolina. And so after much discussion over several years, and after I had finished my term as president, the South Carolina Medical Association did give up the South Carolina Blue Shield insurance company which it operated.
So there's some thought about socialized medicine and bills that had been passed, setting up all kinds of controls for physicians.
Yeah. Well, since I stopped, let's say, direct patient care in 1985, I think, it's apparent to me and these people to whom I talk that there is distinctly government interference with the practice of medicine. And the example that I like to use, so to speak, is the treatment of patients with colon, that is colic diseases, and those in whom resection of the colon is needed. Now, the government says that a patient can come to the hospital at 6 o'clock in the morning and perfectly safely have the operation at 8 o'clock in the morning of the same day. And the patient is supposed to have performed at home a so-called bowel prep, and I doubt seriously that it can really be done as effectively as it can be done in the hospital. I think it takes unfair advantage of the patient, and that it's not wise in every case. I asked one of my friends how he possibly tolerated practicing under such circumstance, and he said he didn't. And I said, well, good, but how? Why? How do you do it? He said, well, I just state the patient is non-compliant. And that sells him. So I hope many of my friends have learned that technique since. Because it's absolutely ridiculous to practice medicine the way the government or some insurance company dictates rather than what is best for the patient.
Now, you had a lot to say about that during your term as president
Mm.
of the State Association, I believe.
Mm-mm.
But no matter what was said, or what you said or wrote about, it didn't help a lot, did it? It just sort of stave off government programs, etc.
Well, of course, Britain at that time had the National Health Service, and some other European countries. And it's never been entirely satisfactory. In the times I've been in England on short visits, it was obvious that anybody who had the means carried private medical insurance, so they were not dependent on the National Health Service. I think it's tremendously interesting that Sweden has given up socialized medicine. One of the best-known doctors in Sweden told me several years ago in a conversation with him that socialized medicine in Sweden did three things. It drove quality down, cost up, and doctors out. It's very sort of interesting to hear now that Sweden has given up socialized medicine. I know of one other country which has done the same thing because it didn't serve the purpose for which it was intended, but I've forgotten the name of it. And why in the world we can't profit from other people's experience, I cannot imagine. Now there's talk about the Canadian system. As I understand it, in Canada, anybody who lives near enough comes to the United States for treatment. The patients have to wait extraordinary length of times for this or that procedure which is indicated. And it is not fulfilling all of the needs that the Canadians have, nor do I believe it will fulfill the needs that we have.
Well, do you still see that as one of the major problems facing medicine today?
Yes, I would say whether or not we need so-called socialized medicine more than it is now is a major problem. And, of course, the President-elect Clinton has that on one of his projects to to develop. Some people think it's old-fashioned and probably inadequate, but I think it's entirely possible that our best system would be a variation of what we had in the past. At that time, when the city and county of Charleston had physicians who paid to look after the injured sick, I don't think of any peoples who were really neglected. Now, if we transfer that to the present time, it seems to me that if every county in the state had a fund for the medical care of the injured and sick, we should consider. Charleston County had it. Other counties in other parts of the country had it. I don't believe in compulsion ordinarily, but we have it certainly in medical service and military service, especially in time of war. We have it in going to school. You got to go to school until you're age 16, whether you learn anything or not. And there are some other examples. Now, if we had a compulsion that every county in every state in the United States had a fund for the medical care of the injured and sick, then we could do without socialized medicine. Every time we go from the county to the state to the federal government, it does nothing but increase costs and invite inefficiency. And that's how we stand now. Whether or not we can ever attain what I think would be practical, at least worth trying, I do not know.
Well, now, does anything Do you remember anything outstanding during your term as president of the state association? Any major?
Well, it's getting to be a few years now. So I
It's only
don't.
20 years, Dr. Parker.
What?
It's only 20 years.
Well, 20 years is one score out of four, or three. That's a very high percentage. uh, no, that. Plus the fact that the South Carolina Medical Association was in the business of selling insurance and operating an insurance company were the dominant problems. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can recall one thing about a mini bottle law. Do you recall anything about
Oh yes,
that
certainly.
during your term as
Certainly, I
president?
remember the mini bottles. Certainly, yes. But I don't think that bothered the South Carolina Medical Association much. I don't remember our being involved in whether we should or should not have it.
There was an ad in the paper one time.
Do you remember?
Yes, there was an ad in the paper one time about various organizations supporting the mini bottle law,
Yes.
and South Carolina Medical Association was one of them.
Well, I recall that now that you mention it, but I don't remember it being any great issue in the year in which I served as president.
So I thought it would be bring in more tax revenue to the state than the quote brown bag law that
Yes.
we'd had
Yeah.
previously.
Mhm.
Now, would you like to comment on any people that you might have worked with, or do you remember anybody outstanding who you worked with? Or I believe Governor West was in office during your term as president, wasn't
You mean in the state of South Carolina, outside of the medical field?
he? Either inside or outside.
No, I don't remember anybody outside. Mhm. Of course, I had many friends and close associates and let's say uh, assistants and associates in research and in practice.
Be pretty optimistic about the future of Madison now.
I would say yes, if we could get the government out of the control that exists now. Mm-hmm. It's just not practical for people who don't know the first thing about medical care and medical practice to exercise the control that's now done.
Well, where do you think we're going in Madison? You think we're going to have a completely socialized medical program sometime in the near future?
Do I think we will go into more socialization than what we have now? Predictions are too dangerous.
All right.
Very, very dangerous. If we do, I don't know how long it will last, for the same reason that I could not have predicted that Sweden would get out of it now.
Right.
They found it simply did not serve the purpose for which it was intended.
Now, when you said you retired, essentially retired in 1985 from your clinical practice.
Approximately, yes.
Yeah. Now, what have you done since then?
Mm-hmm.
Medicine-wise or hobbies, etc.?
Well, I've continued in some research, mostly clinical research, occasional consultation, but not many people want you to see the patient. They usually just want you to look at an X-ray, after which I tell them, and I can tell them what I think about that X-ray, but not what's wrong with the patient. and teaching students in classes at various times, and participating in conferences. Uh, say, trying to keep up in a sense.
You're still pretty active in Madison.
Not as
Okay?
active as I would like to be. I find that so-called retirement is a life of increasing inefficiency. There are less and less people to help you. It's difficult to get everything done that you want to in the so-called allotted time.
I'm sure you're not the only one who's found that, Dr. Parker.
Well,
Now, what you have some hobbies too, don't you? Don't you have some hobbies or other things that you do other than Madison?
what's now? I didn't understand.
Any outside interests or hobbies that you
Oh,
have?
oh, surely. Always been into swimming, boating, and sailing. Those are the main ones. I've done a fair amount of hunting, but it never was any good as a shot. I just like the outing and the exercise and nature, so to speak. But other than that, I don't think of anything valuable.
The sailing is probably the most relaxing thing you have, would you say?
Uh, well, sailing is very hard work, so one can always relax. But it certainly occupied a major part of my, say, off time. Yeah, it's a nice sport. Usually nice people in it. Uh, very little fighting, so to speak, in the sport. Very time consuming, very expensive. So my participation has been definitely limited. Right now, my sons are taking over most of the sailing and racing of the boat.
Do you have anything else that you would like to add to this interview that we might have missed or would like to expand on?
No, I don't think so. The future is too difficult to predict, and I'd like to see what the world's going to happen to it, what's going to happen to medicine, whether or not we will find a cure, for instance, for cancer, and probably other infectious diseases, certainly the greatest public health problem today. We don't know the cause of cancer. I can't think of any other disease for which we have a cure in which we do not know the cause. Uh, except for empiric procedures like removal of the appendix for acute appendicitis. It's curative, but apparently we still don't know the cause of appendicitis. I think the same thing is going to apply to cancer until we find its cause. I doubt if we have a successful. Unfortunately, our success rate is no better now than it was 50 years ago, except in some of the soft tissue tumors like leukeemia and embryonocostinoma. Except for those, and our success is sharply limited. And I think we should be spending more time and more money on the cause of cancer. Unfortunately, the chemotherapy has been the risk one in my clinic. I hope it has better answers in the future.
Well, Dr. Parker, I want to thank you for this interview. Thank you for my standpoint. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. And from Monya's standpoint and from the South Carolina Medical Association,
Yeah.
we've got one more question to ask you now.
All right.
Would you do it all over again?
Yes, I certainly would. Certainly would. Have no particular regrets.
stuff, and I would be remiss if we didn't get on our tape this nice portrait of you that's in this conference room. And we're going to, in a moment, we're going to stop, and then we're going to get a good portrait picture. Now, where did this come from? Thank you very much, Dr. That's my memory. Thank you very much, Dr. Parker. Yeah, I was thinking that too, if we could get round and right.